Hi, my name is Kerry Critchlow from RCI Recording Studios, and today I'm here to talk to you about another Thinking Out Loud video, and the topic is, why is music, for lack of a better word, so bland? Some people might argue that it's just straight up bad, and maybe there's a point to that, but I'm not 100% sure that's necessarily the right word to use, just bad. I think it lacks a little bit of nuance. Now, you might argue that I'm too old, and that's fair. You might argue that my finger is off the pulse, or I'm losing touch with what's cool and hip and popular, and those are all valid arguments. I'm open to that kind of criticism. But I just wanted to give a few thoughts of my own, and these are conversations that I've been having with a lot of people, both young and old, and no one really disagrees that music is bad these days. And I'm going to give maybe just a few reasons why I think that might be the case. But first, I need to preface that with a short kind of personal story. When I was younger, my dad used to say to me that when he was growing up, my grandfather, his father, my dad's dad, was a phenomenal jazz musician. And he was super into music and was a trumpet player. He was very knowledgeable about theory. He was very up on all the popular trends of his time. And he would hear my dad listening to the new music, like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and all the bands of the 60s and 70s. And he would say to my dad, "That's not music, that's just noise." And then my dad, when I was younger, and I started listening to bands like Nirvana and Smashing Pumpkins and Weezer and Soundgarden and all the the grunge and alt bands of that day, my dad would look at me and he'd say, "That's not music, that's just noise." Now here I am, about the same age my father was when he told me that my music was just noise, and I'm listening to today's music, and to me it's not just noise, it's just bland, it's boring, it's uninnovative, it's super well produced. They're well crafted songs oftentimes, but they just lack that quality that would make me more interested in the music. And I'm not sure I can really put my finger on it, but there seems to be a lack of innovation or risk taking. And maybe I'm just not looking at the right spots. Maybe if I were to check out some Spotify playlists or some iHeartRadio, Pandora, whatever streaming services, and dig in, maybe go into some deep dives and some rabbit holes, maybe I'd find that music that could speak to me the same way music spoke to me when I was growing up. That being said, I really enjoy the classics that my dad would have listened to: the Beatles, the Stones, your Zeppelins, the Who, all of that. Like I still enjoy that classic rock, which is weird to say because now the music I grew up listening to is now considered classic rock. And so I guess another thing that's kind of interesting to me is that music really hasn't changed much in the last, say, 15 to 20 years. It used to be that about roughly, give or take, every decade, there would be some kind of a new musical movement that would come along and shake things up and make everything that came before kind of irrelevant or passé or just not hip anymore. And some examples could be like Elvis in the 50s, who came along and, created this new kind of country rock and roll sound that made the doo-wop and jazz groups of the 40s and early 50s seem kind of obsolete and out of touch. And then in the 60s you had the Beatles and the Stones, which came along and kind of made all those 50s songs sound a little bit dated and passé. In the 70s you had kind of your like neo-punk and art prog rock kind of stuff come out that made some of the 60s stuff seem a little bit a little tamer or a little like less sophisticated. In the 80s you had your punk rock scene, your new wave, your Michael Jacksons and hair metal bands, and that kind of left a lot of those 70s rockers seeming a little tamer again. In the 90s, you had that stripped down grunge sound with Nirvana, who came along and just completely uprooted everything that had come before and created a new sound that made all the 80s hair metals and new wave kind of seem a little weird, or not as interesting anymore. And then you had also in the 90s your hip hop artists like Tupac and Biggie Smalls, Dr. Dre, all these, Puff Daddy, not to mention Eminem towards the later 90s, but then hip hop all of a sudden came along and it was this new fresh thing. Now, none of the groups that I've named were the ones that originated their sound. They borrowed liberally from other people. The Beatles were trying to make an Elvis record. Elvis was trying to make kind of a sort of a country record. Nirvana was basically copying bands like the Pixies and Mudhoney and other groups that sort of, did their own thing. Run DMC was doing rap and hip hop, and there were groups before them, even far before or long before your Snoop Dogg's and Biggie Smalls and Tupac's and stuff were hitting the scene. And so none of them innovated their art forms, but they took it to a level and brought it to the mainstream in a way that had appeal and, I don't know, made it cool. And I'm not sure if it's personalities or the music itself, but something snapped about every 10 years or so. And in the early 2000s, you had your pop punk kind of emo stuff that made all the 90s sort of, passe to a degree, although all of those bands I mentioned have timeless hits that are still popular even today. And so they didn't completely erase the past, but they paved the way for something new. And over the last 20 years or so, outside of like EDM, which has been going on since the 80s, that kind of sound, everything is just kind of sort of bland. I mean, nothing's changed. I'm hearing today a lot of modern hits are basically copying the disco of the 70s, or the hip hop of the 90s, or the EDM of the last 40 years. And so to me, there's nothing really new. There's no real new ground being broken. There's no new innovation. There's no cross-pollinating of genres. Everything is sort of like taking a genre that exists and just kind of drilling down further into it. Whereas before, you used to have things that were like a cross of like punk rock and electronica, or hip hop and country, or whatever. Like, sometimes it doesn't always work out, but there's two types of innovation, I've been told. There's vertical innovation, which is basically taking a mousetrap and making a better mousetrap, or taking a car engine and making a more efficient car engine. Then you have what's called horizontal innovation, which is essentially taking chocolate and peanut butter and putting them together to create something completely new and interesting. And I think we've seen a lot of lack of that, at least in my mind. And now, a counter argument to all of this, hate to be wishy-washy, but that gets kind of my personality, is I try to see all sides of an issue, and I don't always arrive at an appropriate conclusion, but I do try to see all sides of the issue. I realize that I'm 40 years old. I have listened to thousands upon thousands of songs. I have heard so many different genres, so many different artists, so much input. I have heard it all. Now, that might be a little facetious, but I haven't heard it all, but I've heard a lot of different music, and so I'm looking at it from a perspective of somebody that has so much musical knowledge inside my brain that when I hear, a modern dance song, I can't help but think, oh, well, that's basically a Bee Gees ripoff, or like a disco ripoff. I'm hearing a lot of the modern hip-hop people, and I'm like, well, that's basically Biggie Smalls, but instead of speaking clearly, you're mumbling. I don't understand. Well, I'm not going to get into that right now. Suffice to say, I realize that I have had a lot of inputs when it comes to my musical knowledge over the years, and so I might be looking at it from a perspective that's not necessarily fair. For instance, when I was growing up, Mary Had a Little Lamb, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, The Wheels on the Bus, these were all amazing songs that I could sing along with and enjoy, and thought that they were fine and dandy. And it was as I grew up, I was exposed to more and more music, and my tastes kind of evolved. And so maybe younger people today, who are generally speaking responsible for most of the music sales, maybe they just haven't heard the same music I have, and so they have no idea that there's better things out there, or that music can sound different than it does today. All that being said, though, my age aside and my experiences aside, I still do feel like there's a lot of lack of innovation in the music industry. It has not really changed music-wise. The sounds have not changed that much since the last 20 years or so. And I'm not sure if that's because there's just a general feeling of timidity. I mean, music is becoming valued less and less as the years go on, because there's more and more and more of it. And you have access to it you have complete access to it. When I was growing up, I couldn't hear every song I wanted to hear unless I bought the CD or cassette or what have you. I might hear a song on the radio, and then I'd have to wait hours and hours before I heard it again, unless I went out and bought that album. And those albums were expensive. They were $15, $20 a piece when I was growing up. They were probably a little cheaper in my dad's age, but now for $8 a month, you have every song basically that's ever been written available at your fingertips to listen to at your leisure, whenever you want. And so the value of music has gone down, and this is putting a little bit of a pressure, I think, on a lot of the labels, which have disappeared over the last 20 years as well, kind of going the way of the phone booth, so to speak, because of these new technologies with the internet and all that. And so you have labels that are less willing to take risks on new types of music, and so they want a proven track record. They want music that they know is going to be popular, that people are going to like before they'll even touch an artist. You contrast that with the 90s, the 80s, going back 20, 30, 40 years ago. Labels would basically buy anyone who they thought had even a modicum of talent. They would give out a loan to that band. The band would record their album, and what generally happened is that 1% of the artists would make the profit, like incredible profit for the record labels. About 10 to 15% would make a little bit of money or break even, and then 80% of the artists lost the label money. But it was the top 20% of artists that were able to cover the costs of the 80% that were losing money. And so the labels would just kind of hedge their bets, sign 100 people, and 20 of those people would make them enough money to cover the losses of the 80 people. Today, that's not the case anymore, and so labels have to be very careful about who they sign, who they promote, who they push, what kind of music they're playing, because if they take a risk and it blows up in their face, they've lost a lot of money, and they're not going to be able to get that back. And so I can relate to a degree, at least, with the mentality of the record labels. That doesn't mean I'm excusing them or think it's reasonable to assume that people don't want new, fresh music. But I don't know, there's just a lot of factors that go into why I think music is so bland. Another possible reason is that because the internet, music has become global. And so what you have is you have people from, let me preface it this way. Go back 30, 40 years ago, before the internet was created, and you had a New York scene, and you had an LA scene, and you had a Cleveland scene, and you had a Nashville scene, and you had a London scene, and you had a Beijing scene, or whatever. Every kind of city or small area around the globe had a kind of a sound associated with that city. Like New York had a sound that was a New York sound. Nashville had a sound that was a Nashville sound. And so the only way to get the cross-pollination is a New York band would go and play over in LA, and they'd hear what LA is doing, and they'd bring some of that flavor back to New York, and vice versa. And this happened kind of you had all these small groups that were doing their own thing, cross-pollinating over here and over here and over here. With the emergence of the internet and the global scene, everybody's being exposed to the same music, and so everybody has the same influences instead of being influenced by random local bands that might have happened in like New York and LA. You're only being exposed to the music that's really selling and really popular, and so everybody, all the aspiring producers, artists, musicians are hearing all the same music, having all the same influences, and producing all the same work, all the same sound. And so that might be another reason for lack of innovation. I don't know what the answer is, and I'm not even 100% sure that creating this innovative new music is something that would be especially positive. It might turn out that I end up hating it because it sounds like noise to me. I don't know. I might be old man yelling at clouds, and if that's the case, so be it. I think I've earned the right to yell at some clouds over my lifetime. But that being said, I'm not convinced that is the reason. I think what I'm actually looking for is something new and different that can appeal to me, that can speak to me, that can intrigue me, surprise me. And I'm not hearing that in modern music today. I'm hearing very much the same bland music being written and performed, and it's top-notch production, top-notch engineering, top-notch performances. I'm not trying to take anything away from these people, and if you like that music, more power to you. I am glad that you are getting exactly the kind of music that you want to listen to and enjoy. That's phenomenal. I'm so happy for you. But as for me and a lot of the people I'm talking to, or have been having these kind of conversations with, we all agree that there's just not a whole lot of new innovation going on out there. No one's taking risks, and if they are taking risks, they're not being promoted, or we're not getting our ears around that music for whatever reason. It could be a lack of promotion and publicity, marketing. It could be that the best musicians in the world writing the best music just don't, aren't doing it. They aren't promoting. They're bad at the other stuff that you have to be good with in this day and age. I mean, for instance, back in the day, you could basically rely on the label to take care of all the marketing, all the promotions, all the stuff and all you had to do was focus on the music. Well, nowadays, if you want to be a successful artist, you have to do all of it. You have to do the social media. You have to do the marketing. You have to get out there and sell tickets. You have to promote the album. You have to play the shows. You have to write the music. You have to do it all, and it can be exhausting, and it's not easy out there for most gigging musicians, and I can empathize with that to a large degree. I wish I had a solution. My best advice out there for any upcoming songwriters, musicians, producers is be willing to take risks, take some chances. Don't do what everybody else is doing. Have the courage to be an original, to make something that could risk offending other people, because without risking offending other people, you'll never get noticed. The Beatles were certainly offensive, especially as the example to my granddad. They were just noise to him. Eminem, very offensive. Great career, great music. Nirvana, very offensive to a lot of people, but yet they spoke to enough other people that the good far outweighed the bad in those cases. And some of the best music that's ever been released has risked offending people, but was able to, instead of offending everybody, speak to the people that it was speaking to, and those people turned around and made those bands famous. And so, I don't know. That's my best advice. It might not be great advice. Take it with a grain of salt. Do what your heart is telling you to do. Write the music you feel called to write. But at the end of the day, I would encourage you to have courage to write music that is different, that is not the same as everything else you're hearing out there. Don't be afraid to write a creative melody. Don't be afraid to jump outside some song structures. Now, all that being said, there are certain things that you maybe want to there are certain rules maybe you want to follow, but other rules you want to break, and it's figuring out which rules to follow and which rules to break and when. If that makes sense. Maybe I'll do another video on some of these ancillary topics that I've kind of been bringing up as I've gone through this video. But anyways, I have no idea if this has been helpful at all. Mostly it's probably just been me kind of venting my own frustrations, and I apologize if that's how it's come across. But I do hope this has been helpful. It's given you something to think about, and maybe you out there listening will be the next, Nirvana or the next Beatle or the next revolution that can take everything we've been hearing over the last 20 years and make it passe and finally bring us something new and exciting and interesting and intriguing to listen to. And I really hope it's you. Anyways, I hope you have a wonderful day and take care. Bye.